And as you know, we've been talking with a number of candidates in various races that are contested. The 10th District Judge race is a contested race. In fact, Paul Beardslee is presiding over that court right now, and he joins us this morning. Good morning, Judge.
Good morning, Richard.
Thanks for your time today. We have been talking at length with judge candidates, and it's an interesting thing because voters have maybe a little bit more incumbent responsibility to figure out what that's about, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the circumstances by which you find yourself presiding over the 10th District Court don't happen every day, right. But they happen, don't they?
Right. Well, it happened in my case about a year ago, approximately, back in August or September of 2015, Judge Conrad Sint retired from the circuit court, or announced his retirement that was going to be upcoming. And so it was apparent to a lot of us that Judge John Hallisey was quite likely to be appointed to that position. Mm-hmm. So when Judge Hallisey applied for appointment to the circuit court, I threw my name into the hat also at that time, ostensibly for the purpose of applying for the circuit court position. But when it came time for an interview, I encouraged the people who were making that decision, Judge Hallisey's your guy. Mm-hmm. He should be the next circuit court judge. I'm only in this because I'm interested in the district court. And there was a possibility, I think, that they might have made two selections out of one pool of candidates.
I see.
That didn't happen. So once Judge Hallisey was appointed, they reopened the process for the district court position that had been Judge Hallisey's. I put my name into that and went through that process, which is a lot different than the election process.
Right.
And ultimately was appointed and have been serving since March of this year.
And that's an appointment that's made by the governor when the circumstances are like this. You have a judge who moves on for some reason, and it's prior to the end of the term. This is the protocol.
Right.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
So what was involved in that? Was that an interview with the governor, or how's that work?
The only conversation with the governor was on the day of the phone call.
I see.
But prior to that, there's a fairly involved process where one has to fill out a pretty significant application form. They ask for writing samples. They want to see transcripts from law school. They ask for the names of the lawyers and judges that you've practiced in front of in the preceding several months. And then they actually call those people and have conversations with them and inquire about what kind of person you are, whether you are prepared, whether you're civil and polite, whether, just a lot of things that one might be interested in making that kind of a selection. And then there's an interview process with a group of people from the State Bar of Michigan, which is a little star chamber-ish because you walk into this conference room with a table that's 20 feet long, and on one side is a dozen people, and on the other side is you.
Wow.
And they ask some questions, and you do your best to answer and see whether you can react on your feet or your seat as it is. And you answer their questions, and they say, okay, thank you very much. And you don't get any feedback beyond that. You walk out, and then sometime later there was an interview with people from the governor's office.
Uh-huh.
That seemed to go fairly well for me. And what followed that was some weeks later, I got a phone call one morning saying, from the governor's office, and somebody said, would you be available for a phone call from our office this afternoon about 3:30?
Wow.
And I said, I think I can make myself available for that, yes.
Right.
And so it happened that one of my sons and I were driving toward Detroit area that afternoon. So I pulled the car over about Jackson, and I said, Nick, it's your turn to drive now. I'm going to just be available for the telephone because I didn't want to mess that up.
Check how your reception was.
Right. Actually, and my son Nick said, well, what happens if we get to that one curve on 94 between Chelsea or just before you get to Chelsea at the railroad tracks there on 94, and where there used to be a dead spot for AT&T.
Right.
And I said, it won't happen there. Sure enough, that's where it happened. Fortunately, there was no dead spot. So we had a very pleasant 20-second long conversation. He asked if I would be willing to serve as judge. I said I would be happy to do so. He said, okay, somebody from my office will call you in a few minutes. So I hung up, and I started texting and calling my friends. Woohoo, guess what? And 10 or 15 minutes later, somebody called from the governor's office and said, okay, we've alerted the right people, and so now you can tell people about this.
Whoops.
And I was, well, that's good news.
He didn't tell me to keep quiet. Yeah. Well, it would have been difficult to say, Governor, you're breaking up. So we're glad that the signal was good.
Yeah.
Judge Paul Beardslee is here presiding now after all of that of the 10th District Court and would like now to continue to do so. And we'll talk more about his background and why he wants to continue when we come back on WBCK. We're here with Judge Paul Beardslee of the 10th District Court. What's your background, Ben, Paul, that you can talk about that led you here?
Well, if you want the entire story, I was 9 pounds, 9 ounces at birth.
I guess you don't have to go back that far.
I grew up in Jackson County, so not too far away. Attended college at Spring Arbor University. It was then Spring Arbor College.
Right.
Then on to Wayne State University to law school. And then I came back to this area in 1989. I started practicing law. I can always remember that it was March of 1989 because on my first day on the job, a couple of attorneys who were showing me, how to get in through the right door of the courthouse, took me someplace, and we watched a portion of the Michigan versus Dayton basketball game. It was the first game of the NCAA tournament that year when Michigan won the tournament.
Right.
So I can remember it was 89 that way. But I practiced law with offices in Marshall and also in Concord for a while. And for 25, 26 years, a variety of things. Started out doing a fair amount of criminal appointment work, misdemeanor appointments, that sort of thing. Occasionally would get a retained criminal matter, sometimes felonies. But most of what I did was civil work. And for the last 10 years that I was practicing law, I was a city attorney for the city of Marshall.
Okay.
In addition to doing other things, a lot of other things, including estate planning, real estate related work, general business litigation. At one point I represented some people that I'd known for a long time who had rental properties all over the state. Yeah. And so that took me into district courts all over the state of Michigan, which was a good learning experience for me. It's the same set of court rules, more or less, in almost every court in the state, but they're applied in a different way because of the personalities involved. The judges are different. The clerk's office has a different personality as you go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And so it was a good thing for me to see that things are done differently in other places. Sometimes they do them better, and sometimes they do them in ways that aren't so great. But it was interesting to observe that.
So that made you interested then in the district court, shall we say, and maybe started your process of thinking about being a judge, maybe.
Right. Well, actually, several years ago, my wife, who was from Battle Creek, my late wife graduated from Battle Creek Central and grew up in Urbandale. And when we had been married, we were living in the Jackson area for the first year we were married, and we had these telephone bills that were just tremendous. That was back in the days when intrastate calls were more expensive than interstate calls.
Yeah, 50 feet was a long-distance call, yeah.
And so we had these big phone bills, and I said, we have a problem here, and I don't know what we're going to do about it. And after a month or two, she said, I have a solution. I'm moving to Marshall. And I said, oh, okay. And she said, if you want to move to Marshall with me, you can too. And I thought, well, here's this woman who I love, who's carrying our firstborn child. I think I'm going to move to Marshall also.
Guess we're moving.
So I told my folks that we were going to move to Marshall. My dad said, are you sure that's a good idea? And I said, well, why wouldn't it be? And he said, well, I always had the idea if you stuck around Jackson County, maybe you'd be a judge someday. And I said, Dad, that's nice, but I'm not really interested in being a judge. And if it ever happens, maybe it'll happen in Calhoun County. So one thing led to another.
And fast forward to the call from the governor.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, at this point, you'd like to continue in this. And when we come back in a minute, we can talk a little bit about why. Right. And you have the unique, I suppose, experience of having gotten your feet wet here. And I guess that's one great way to fact find about whether or not you feel you're in the right place. And so we'll discuss that with Judge Paul Beardslee in just a moment. A few more minutes with Judge Paul Beardslee, the 10th District Court. So talk about the difference in your view and for you personally between representing someone in the district court and now presiding over it, and your impressions of that in the time that you've done it.
Well, I really think in some respects I'm a better judge than I was a lawyer because I always had the fault as an attorney of being able to see the other side and understand what their position was and thinking sometimes, well, that's not completely unreasonable. Where if I really had the killer instinct, I would have been, completely dismissive of the other side's position, even though it would be my position 20 minutes later on the next file.
That's the way it works, yeah.
But I think that I have a good view of both sides of a lot of issues. What is the most surprising to me is that I thought when I become a judge, I'm going to have the authority to make these decisions and things are going to go forward and, I'm going to be the person in charge of the courtroom. Yeah. Well, I'm in charge of the courtroom, but I can't do anything without everybody else. That is, I think in some respects, the most powerful person in the building is the scheduling clerk because things get scheduled. Sometimes they get double booked, sometimes they don't. But if things aren't scheduled in advance, you can't expect defendant, defense attorney, prosecutor, or plaintiff's attorney, witnesses, et cetera, to all be present. Everybody has to have notice in advance, and so there's a great deal of hurry up and wait, which is, I'm sure, very frustrating to people who are trying to deal with the system. It was frustrating to me when I was on the other side, when I was practicing law. That, you hurry up, you get there, you never want to be late for court. It never starts early. And then you wait around for your turn, and sometimes it comes and sometimes it doesn't come, and that can be frustrating. And so that's part of what I'm trying to do is to keep expediting things. Again, we can't start early, but try not to start too terribly late and try to be respectful of the people's schedules who are supposed to be there, who are not just supposed to be there, they're sometimes subpoenaed to attend. They are obligated to show up.
Right. Talk about the dynamic of the district court and how you see yourself working well, or your impressions of how you work.
Well, the district court is the court where we deal with misdemeanors, that is matters that can send a person to jail but not prison, and where we also deal with felonies from the standpoint of any person who's accused of a felony is entitled to a probable cause hearing called a preliminary exam, at which the district court judge essentially acts as a grand jury, makes a determination about whether there's probable cause that a felony was committed, that this person committed the felony, and that if so, the matter is bound over or kept in the system and moves on to circuit court for trial or other disposition. So there's that aspect of it, and then on civil cases, it's anything up to $25,000. So if it's $25,000 and 1 cent, that's a circuit court case. But if it's $25,000 even, that's a district court case. Or landlord-tenant matters, land contract forfeitures, that sort of thing that happen in the district court. We're fortunate. Judges Durham and Line, Sam Durham and Frank Line, have been on the bench for a combined 57 years, and they have a lot of experience. They've probably forgotten more about the district court than I know. And also, Judge Jim Norlander is on a district court bench as well. So if I have questions, and I do have questions, fewer now than I did when I started, thankfully, I can go in and inquire of Judge Durham, Judge Line, or Judge Norlander, and they each have a different way of relating the information, but it's always helpful, and they've been very supportive, and I'm very appreciative of their help. I'm also fortunate because I'm in the position that Judge Hallisey created, which is the sobriety treatment court. And so I'm the sobriety court judge. I'm not the prohibition judge, but I am the sobriety court judge. And I have some real-world experience dealing with alcoholism in the family and former clients. And so it's not happy experience, but it's experience. And it's very helpful to me, and I think I have a different way of looking at things in the sobriety court than I wouldn't have if I didn't have that real life experience. So it's really, I think it's a unique position in this county.
I'm running out of time, but I've asked all of our judge candidates who've been here this question. We use a litmus test in most other races, usually a party affiliation, to help us sort out where we are in line with the viewpoints of that candidate. Obviously, in a judge race, we can't do that. So there is probably more work involved for the voter, incumbent upon them to figure this out. Does that concern you here?
Well, it's not concerning, but it concerns voters. I know that, and so that is of interest to me. I've been knocking on doors, and people say, "Well, just tell us, are you a Republican or Democrat?" And I say, I don't really care about somebody's party affiliation when they come in. I am fortunate to have the support of the Calhoun County Deputy Sheriff's Association, or Sheriff Deputies Association, excuse me, and numerous judges. There's information available on the web at paulbeardslee.com, and also there's a Facebook page, Retain Judge Beardslee, I think is the name of it.
Okay.
But at any rate, there's more information there. I appreciate the endorsements I've received. I think that's an indication that I'm picking up the job at a reasonable pace, and I enjoy the work.
We'll leave it right there. Judge Paul Beardslee, best of luck to you, and thank you.
Thanks.